We are recovering existing arrears by meeting with people. Some people are paying the arrears in full. Other people are entering into arrears agreements for the repayment of the arrears within a certain period. We've also introduced a mechanism in the system so that if people default on the arrears payment, it will trigger the system again and we'll call their attention again. So that's one thing that we're doing. But what we've actively been doing as well is when the department meets with people who are in arrears, they'll also look at mechanisms to secure rent going forward. So really it's a two-pronged approach. It's about recovering the historic debt, but also working with people to ensure that they are up to date with their current rent to make sure that the arrears figure doesn't grow.
Have any people been penalised?
We've introduced mechanisms so that people cannot have luxuries if they are in arrears of rent. For example, you may recall last year when the government allocated berths in the small boat marina, those berths would not be available to people who were in arrears of rent and other government arrears. The same thing happened when the parking permits at Mid Harbour's estate had to be renewed last summer. They would not have been renewed to anybody who was in arrears of rent either. So
it's a form of penalisation?
No, it's not a form of penalisation. It's the reverse, actually. It's people who are in arrears not having access to additional luxuries. So just because you cannot have a berth in the small boat marina, if you're in arrears of rent, is not really being penalised, because if you can afford a small boat, then surely you can afford to pay your rent, because really your rent and your dues to the government need to take priority over and above a luxury such as having a berth to moor your boat.
What's the next step in the strategy? Will legal action be introduced?
Yes, that is coming quite shortly. At the moment, we are still processing people who are coming to the department wanting to make arrangements to pay their arrears without the need to resort to legal action. And the housing department is extremely busy. In fact, we have in excess of 120 appointments scheduled for this month alone. So we are in the process of processing that. But certainly the next step will be to look at litigation for people who have completely disregarded the communication from the housing department in the last year and who are in employment. Because when the housing department looks at people who are in arrears of housing rent, we distinguish people who can pay but don't want to pay to people who have genuine hardship circumstances and are unable to pay. They are certainly not the priority. Clearly we'll work with everybody to help them arrange a realistic repayment of arrears. But there are people, and we know from the figures, because of course we have information from other government departments at our disposal, we know who's in employment, we know what people earn, and certainly if you have a household where various people are in employment and there is an income and rent is not being paid and no genuine reason is forthcoming as to why rent is not being paid, then clearly those are the cases that will be a priority for legal action for recovery of those arrears.